Carl Jung documented one of the most cruel psychological paradoxes of our time. Individuals gifted with extraordinary empathic abilities who become magnetically attractive to people who will eventually turn against them with inexplicable hostility. Jung discovered that their greatest gift becomes the source of their deepest suffering. Today, I'm going to reveal Jung's troubling discovery about empathic psychology and why he believed this pattern either completely destroys sensitive individuals or transforms them into exactly what humanity needs for its emotional evolution. Jung observed a recurring pattern among his empathic patients in his clinical practice. These individuals possessed what he called luminous emotional authenticity. They could instantly perceive others' pain, respond with genuine compassion, and create safe spaces where people felt truly understood for the first time in their lives. Yet every close relationship followed the same devastating pattern. Jung noted that these individuals attracted others like moths to a flame. However, these same people developed unconscious resentment toward the very qualities that had initially attracted them. It was as if their light exposed shadows that others couldn't bear to acknowledge. People would come to confess their deepest secrets to these empaths, find healing in their presence, and experience profound emotional relief. Then, without warning, they would begin criticizing them, undermining their confidence, and eventually abandoning them entirely, often blaming them for being too intense or simply too much. Jung realized he wasn't observing simple relational dysfunction. He was witnessing what happens when unconscious people encounter someone who has maintained their connection to their authentic feeling function. This discovery of Jung's became one of his most important insights into human psychology. Authentic emotional expression triggers unconscious shame in those who have betrayed their own emotional truth. Jung identified what he called the authenticity wound. People who have cut themselves off from true feeling develop unconscious hostility toward those who haven't. The empath's natural emotional expression becomes a painful reminder of what they've lost. Jung observed that empaths fall into what he called the mirror trap. Their authentic presence automatically triggers others' repressed emotions and buried pain. This creates intense discomfort in people who have built their entire identity around emotional numbness. The person caught in this dynamic experiences what Jung named amplification through projection. They unconsciously blame the empath for making them feel emotions they've spent years avoiding. The empath becomes responsible for pain that existed long before they entered the picture. If you've ever been criticized for being too emotional or too intense, you understand this dynamic. Your empathy isn't excessive. Others are often too numb. Jung discovered something even more troubling. People often seek out those with empathic gifts precisely because their unconscious recognizes what they've lost. They're drawn to the emotional aliveness they observe, yet simultaneously resent it because it exposes their own emotional deadness. This creates what Jung identified as the fundamental psychological paradox affecting sensitive individuals. Empaths become targets of what Jung extensively documented as shadow projection, where people unconsciously transfer their own rejected qualities onto the empath, then attack them for possessing those same traits. Through his analytical work, Jung discovered that people who resent empaths are actually resenting parts of themselves they've disowned. The empath's emotional sensitivity reminds them of their own buried sensitivity. The empath's authenticity exposes their own falseness. What makes this particularly cruel is that empaths often possess exactly the qualities these people once had, but learned to suppress. Jung observed that the individual attacks in the empath what they killed in themselves. The resentment isn't toward the empath, but toward their own abandoned emotional truth. Before we continue, if this content is helping you understand your own empathic experience, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. You'll also find additional resources in the description of this video. Your support helps me continue exploring these profound psychological discoveries from Jung. This dynamic creates what Jung called the punishment of innocence. People who have lost their emotional innocence through trauma or social conditioning unconsciously punish those who have managed to preserve theirs. Jung documented how this manifests in subtle but devastating ways. People criticize empaths for being too sensitive while secretly wishing they could feel deeply again themselves. They mock empathic responses as naive while they've simply become cynical to protect themselves from pain. The most insidious aspect is that these attacks often come disguised as concern or advice. You need to toughen up. The world will eat you alive. You're too trusting. These statements reveal the speaker's own emotional wounds while attempting to dim the empath's light. Jung realized this wasn't conscious malice, but unconscious self-hatred, projected outward onto someone who represented what they could no longer access in themselves. Through his analytical work with empaths and their relationships, Jung identified 4 distinct patterns of how people unconsciously attack empathic individuals for their authentic emotional expression. The first type is the emotional critic. Jung documented people who specifically target empaths' emotional responses. These individuals have learned to suppress their own feelings so completely that seeing authentic emotion triggers unconscious shame about their own emotional death. These people, whom Jung called the feeling police, constantly tell empaths that their emotions are wrong, excessive, or inappropriate. They've internalized the message that emotions are weakness and project this belief onto empaths. The second type is the authenticity attacker. These individuals unconsciously resent empaths for being authentic because they've built their entire identity around false personas. Jung observed how people living behind masks feel threatened by those who don't need masks to survive. These people, whom Jung called the performance police, criticize empaths for being too real or inappropriate when they simply haven't learned to hide their authentic self behind social facades. The third type is the vulnerability violator. Jung noted people who specifically target empaths' openness and trust. These individuals have been so wounded that they've completely closed their hearts and unconsciously punish empaths for maintaining their emotional availability. These people, whom Jung called the trust destroyers, take advantage of empathic openness, then blame empaths for being too trusting, rather than acknowledging their own betrayal of that trust. The fourth type is the most dangerous, according to Jung, the light dimmer. These people systematically work to diminish empaths' confidence in their own gifts. They've disconnected from their own inner light so completely that others' brightness becomes unbearable. These people, whom Jung called the brightness reducers, use subtle psychological manipulation to convince empaths that their natural empathy is a problem to fix rather than a gift to honor. Understanding your specific pattern is crucial because each type requires different strategies for what Jung called authentic self-protection. Jung identified 3 specific dangers that made this psychological dynamic a serious threat to both individual empaths and collective emotional evolution. The first danger is authenticity erosion. Jung observed that constant exposure to resentment and criticism causes many empaths to begin doubting their own emotional reality. They start suppressing their natural responses to fit in with people who cannot tolerate authentic emotion. Jung wrote that the empath who abandons their authenticity to gain acceptance loses the very quality that made them valuable. They become another emotionally dead person in a world that desperately needs emotional aliveness. This creates what Jung called the dimming epidemic. Empaths learning to hide their light to avoid triggering others' unconscious hostility. The second danger is psychological self-betrayal. Jung documented how empaths often internalize the criticism they receive, beginning to see their empathy as a flaw rather than a gift. They start believing they're too much or too sensitive instead of recognizing that others are often too little and too numb. The greatest tragedy occurs when the empath begins attacking their own emotional nature with the same violence others have directed toward them. They become their own emotional assassin. The third danger, most critical according to Jung, is collective emotional stagnation. Jung discovered that when empaths learn to suppress their authenticity, humanity loses its emotional pioneers, the individuals capable of modeling what healthy emotional expression looks like. Jung called this the arrest of emotional evolution, when the people most capable of advancing collective emotional intelligence are forced to hide to protect themselves from unconscious attacks. Jung wrote that the suppression of empathic individuals represents humanity's unconscious rejection of its own emotional potential. We attack in others what we most need to reclaim in ourselves. This is why Jung considered the protection and development of empathic individuals essential for human psychological advancement. In the continuation of this exploration of Jung's discoveries, we'll see how he developed what he called the authentic self-preservation protocol, a systematic approach to maintaining empathic gifts while protecting against others' unconscious projection. as well as the fascinating historical examples he studied to understand how certain empathic individuals managed to thrive despite the resentment they encountered. Jung developed what he called the authentic self-preservation protocol, a systematic approach to maintaining empathic gifts while protecting against others' unconscious projection. This revolutionary protocol included 3 distinct phases that Jung had observed in his most successful patients. The first phase, recognition and validation, required individuals with empathic gifts to first recognize that the resentment they face isn't personal. It's shadow projection from people who have lost their connection to their own feeling function. Jung understood that the hatred directed toward their authenticity is actually self-hatred projected outward. The empathic individual isn't the problem. They're the mirror reflecting someone else's inner wound. Jung instructed empaths to interpret criticism and hostility as information about the critic's psychological state, rather than accurate commentary on their own behavior. This foundational technique allowed empaths to develop what Jung called projection immunity, the ability to recognize personal attacks as revealing the attacker's unhealed wounds. The second phase, boundary crystallization, involved Jung's discovery that those with empathic abilities need what he called energetic boundaries. This is the capacity to maintain their authentic expression while protecting themselves from others' unconscious projections. This requires learning to distinguish between authentic feedback that serves individuation and projection-based attacks designed to dim their authentic self-expression. Jung called this developing psychological discernment. The third phase involved what Jung called conscious relational choices, the ability to connect deeply with people who appreciate authenticity while maintaining distance from those who resent it. Jung's approach emphasized that empathic individuals serve no one by dimming their feeling function to accommodate those who prefer emotional numbness. Their authentic expression is medicine for those ready to heal, and a mirror for those ready to see. This requires developing what Jung called vibrational attunement, attracting people who resonate with authenticity rather than those who fear it. Jung's insights extended beyond clinical work to include historical figures who succeeded in maintaining their empathic nature, despite facing resentment for their emotional authenticity. The case of Saint Francis of Assisi represented successful integration, according to Jung. He studied how Francis maintained radical empathy and emotional openness, despite criticism from religious authorities who preferred emotional suppression. Francis demonstrated what Jung called authentic integration. Francis faced constant criticism for being too emotional and too compassionate, yet he never dimmed his empathic response to suffering. His authentic spiritual expression threatened those who had made religion an intellectual exercise devoid of true feeling. Jung noted that Francis's success came from his recognition that criticism of his empathy revealed the spiritual poverty of his critics, rather than flaws in his own nature. In contrast, the case of Vincent van Gogh illustrated unprotected sensitivity. Jung observed how Van Gogh's extraordinary empathic perception created incredible art, but also made him vulnerable to others' unconscious resentment toward his emotional intensity. Van Gogh's letters reveal how people constantly criticized him for being too much, too emotional, too intense, too sensitive. Unlike Francis, Van Gogh internalized these criticisms and began attacking his own empathic nature. Jung's analysis showed that Van Gogh possessed the empathic vision necessary for genius but lacked the psychological protection required to preserve it. His tragedy wasn't his sensitivity, but his belief that others' inability to tolerate it meant something was wrong with him. Most significantly, Jung documented his own experience as an individual with empathic abilities, navigating professional environments that often resented emotional depth and psychological insight. Jung learned that his ability to see psychological truth threatened those who preferred psychological falseness. His choice was to dim his perception to gain acceptance or maintain it and accept potential isolation from those who fear authentic vision. Jung's breakthrough came when he realized that protecting his empathic gifts served not only his own individuation, but the advancement of psychological understanding itself. Jung emphasized that empaths need what he called a vibrational sanctuary, relationships with others who appreciate rather than resent authentic emotional expression. Jung wrote that the empath cannot thrive in emotional isolation, yet cannot survive in relationships with those who attack their authenticity. They must create conscious community with others who celebrate rather than suppress emotional aliveness. Jung identified 3 types of relational sanctuaries essential for empaths. First, fellow empathic companions. Jung identified the importance of connecting with others who share empathic gifts. These relationships are characterized by mutual recognition, emotional safety, and appreciation of sensitivity rather than its criticism. These connections often form quickly because both parties feel relief at finding someone who doesn't try to dim their light or criticize their emotional responses. Second, emotionally evolved non-empaths. Jung observed that certain people, while not naturally empathic, have done enough psychological work to appreciate and protect empathic individuals. They recognize empathy as a gift rather than a flaw. These individuals often serve as bridges between the empathic person and the wider world, helping create safer spaces for authentic expression. Third, conscious light appreciators. Jung identified people who, regardless of their own empathic abilities, consciously choose to support and protect authentic emotional expression in others. They understand that empathic individuals serve an important function in collective emotional evolution. Jung developed specific indicators for identifying safe relationships. They question your emotional experiences with authentic curiosity rather than judgment. They appreciate your empathic insights rather than criticizing your sensitivity. They protect your emotional energy rather than draining it. They encourage your authentic expression rather than asking you to dim it. They recognize your empathy as strength rather than treating it as weakness. Jung taught empaths to gradually reveal their authentic nature while observing how others respond. Start with small expressions of empathic insight. Notice whether people appreciate or resent your emotional awareness. Assess whether they protect or violate your emotional boundaries. Gradually increase authenticity with those who demonstrate appreciation. Create distance from those who consistently attack your empathic nature. Jung emphasized that the goal isn't to hide your light, but to share it with those who can appreciate its beauty, rather than resent its brightness. Jung saw successful empathic development as essential not only for individual well-being but for collective emotional advancement toward more authentic human connection. Jung wrote that the empath who successfully integrates their gifts while protecting their authenticity becomes a beacon for others seeking to reconnect with their own emotional truth. They prove that sensitivity and strength can coexist. Jung identified 4 stages of what he called light integration. The first stage, recognition without suppression, occurs when empaths learn to recognize resentment directed toward them as projection rather than accurate commentary. Jung called this projection immunity. Jung observed that wisdom begins when the empath stops believing that others' inability to tolerate their light means they should dim it. The problem isn't being too much, but that others become too little. The second stage, boundary development without hardening, involves creating energetic protection while maintaining emotional openness. Jung called this selective permeability, the ability to remain empathic while protecting against projection. He noted that the integrated empath learns to distinguish between authentic emotional connection and psychological attack disguised as relationship. They remain open to love while becoming immune to hatred. The third stage, community creation without compromise, occurs when empaths stop trying to win acceptance from those who resent authenticity and instead focus on building relationships with those who appreciate it. Jung wrote that the empath's evolution requires releasing the need to be understood by everyone and focusing on being truly known by the right people. Quality of connection matters more than quantity of acceptance. The fourth stage, service without sacrifice, involves what Jung called authentic service, using empathic gifts to help others while maintaining strong boundaries against those who would exploit or resent these abilities. Jung observed that the fully integrated empath serves from overflow rather than depletion. They give their gifts to those who can receive them without demanding acceptance from those who cannot. Jung believed that protected empaths serve a vital evolutionary function. They model what healthy emotional expression looks like while maintaining their ability to help others reconnect with their own buried authenticity. Jung wrote that the empath who successfully preserves their light in a world that often prefers darkness becomes a living reminder that emotional death isn't inevitable. They carry the flame that others can use to reignite their own emotional aliveness. Jung documented specific pitfalls that can derail empaths' journey toward authentic self-preservation and conscious community building. The first pitfall, the revenge trap, occurs when empaths, in recognizing how they've been treated, develop resentment toward those who attack their authenticity. They begin attacking others' emotional numbness the way others have attacked their emotional aliveness. Jung warned that the empath who responds to unconscious attack with conscious attack has learned the wrong lesson. Understanding projection doesn't justify projecting back. The second pitfall, the superiority complex, occurs when empaths use their understanding of unconscious dynamics to feel superior to those who resent their authenticity. They develop what Jung called enlightened arrogance. Jung wrote that the empath who believes their emotional aliveness makes them better than others has completely missed the point. Their gift is meant to serve healing, not create hierarchy. The third pitfall, isolation justification, occurs when empaths use their understanding of projection to justify complete withdrawal from challenging relationships. They convince themselves that anyone who can't appreciate their gifts isn't worth engaging. Jung noted that true integration requires the empath to maintain their authenticity while remaining compassionate and available to those ready to receive their gifts. Isolation serves no one. The fourth pitfall, light dimming, occurs when empaths, despite understanding the dynamics, still choose to suppress their authenticity to avoid conflict. They understand projection intellectually, but remain emotionally afraid of others' resentment. Jung emphasized that understanding why others attack your light doesn't eliminate the pain of being attacked. The empath must develop authentic inner strength, not just intellectual insight. Jung developed ongoing practices for maintaining authentic expression while protecting against projection. Regular assessment of which relationships support versus drain your empathic gifts. Conscious choice of when to engage empathically and when to maintain protective boundaries. Connection with others who share similar experiences and challenges. Recognition that some people may never be able to appreciate authentic emotion. Focus on serving those who can receive your gifts rather than trying to convert those who resent them. Jung wrote that the authentic empath doesn't try to force their light on everyone, but ensures their light continues burning for those who need its warmth. Jung understood empathic psychology in the context of collective emotional evolution, seeing authentic empathic individuals as essential for humanity's advancement toward more authentic emotional expression. Jung believed that individuals who maintain their feeling function despite unconscious attack serve as proof that emotional aliveness is possible even in an emotionally disconnected world. They are emotional pioneers, showing others the way back to their own hearts. Jung observed that throughout history, empathic individuals have served as bridges between humanity's emotional past and its emotional future. They preserve emotional wisdom during times of collective numbness and model emotional healing when others are ready to receive it. Jung noted that what appears in the empathic individual as personal emotional authenticity later manifests in the collective as cultural emotional evolution. They serve as flamekeepers during humanity's emotional dark ages. Jung believed that in the modern era, what we now call empaths might sense and respond to collective emotional trauma that requires conscious treatment. Authentic feeling buried, that demands expression for collective healing. The cost of emotional suppression on individual and social well-being. Possibilities for more authentic human connection beyond surface-level interaction. The need for emotional intelligence in leadership and decision-making. Jung's crucial insight was that those with empathic gifts serve others best not by dimming their feeling function to make others comfortable, but by maintaining their authenticity, to show others what emotional aliveness looks like. Jung understood that empathic individuals serve humanity, not by becoming emotionally numb like everyone else, but by staying emotionally alive despite everyone else. Their authenticity is medicine for a world suffering from what Jung called the arrest of emotional evolution. At the highest level of development, Jung observed that empaths learn to hold their gifts with both strength and compassion, maintaining their authenticity while understanding that others' resentment comes from pain rather than malice. Jung called this luminous compassion, the ability to shine their light fully while having empathy for those who cannot yet tolerate that brightness. After working with Jung's integration method, empaths' relational patterns can be completely transformed. These individuals learn to recognize resentment directed toward their authenticity as information about others' psychological wounds, rather than evidence that something was wrong with their feeling function. They find their tribe, people who celebrate rather than attack their empathic gifts. They begin using their abilities to serve those who can receive them, rather than trying to win acceptance from those who resent them. Most importantly, they stop dimming their emotional authenticity to accommodate others' preference for emotional numbness. Jung's observations revealed that these patients learned that their empathic nature wasn't a flaw to correct, but a gift to protect. They discovered that the problem had never been their emotional aliveness, but others' emotional disconnection, and their unconscious resentment of what they had lost in themselves. This represents Jung's most important discovery about empathic psychology. Those who resent your authenticity are usually mourning their own abandoned feeling function. Their hostility toward your emotional aliveness reveals their pain about their own suppressed emotional truth. Your empathic nature isn't too much for this world. This world has simply become too disconnected from its own emotional potential. You're not broken because others can't tolerate your feeling function. They're wounded because they've learned to tolerate emotional numbness. The question isn't whether people will resent your authenticity, but whether you'll protect your feeling function while having compassion for those who have lost theirs. Jung's integration method offers a path from unconscious victimization to conscious service, from hiding your gifts to sharing them wisely, from suppressing your authenticity to letting it shine for those who need its warmth. You were born to be empathically alive, not to dim yourself for those who prefer emotional disconnection, but to model emotional authenticity for those ready to reclaim their own buried feeling function. The world needs your light, but it needs it burning brightly rather than hidden under the bushel of others' unconscious projection. Your empathy isn't your weakness. Others' inability to tolerate authentic emotion is their unhealed wound projected onto your strength. Learn Jung's integration principles, and you become exactly what Jung believed empathic individuals were meant to be: bridges between humanity's emotional past and its emotional future, guardians of authentic feeling in a world that has forgotten how to feel. Healers who maintain their own integrity while helping others remember theirs. Jung's most important discovery wasn't that people resent empaths' authenticity, but that this resentment reveals humanity's unconscious grief over its own lost emotional truth. Your light doesn't need to dim. Their ability to appreciate authenticity needs to brighten. You're not too much for anyone. The right people will celebrate your empathic gifts, while the wrong people reveal themselves through their resentment of what they can no longer access in themselves.